669. Keep in mind that this next job might include a C weapon out of literally nowhere. Stay on your toes, bring the Zimmermans, and get it done. I will be showing off Armored Core 6's bosses in this video to make my point, but it will not contain any details or spoilers for AC6's plot until much later, largely because said story is mostly irrelevant and background noise to the giant mech fights. That being said, it would have been nice if the devs also got that memo. The difficulty curve in this game is schizophrenic. The vast majority of missions are complete cakewalks, but with the occasional difficulty space elevator akin to a brick wall interlaced throughout seemingly randomly. Most missions in this game are not very hard. They can be beaten with just about any mech you can cook up, and are well balanced for your first blind run, which is ultimately the most important one. Then, there are the bosses. Almost every significant boss in the game are C weapons, which is a term that roughly translates to shoehorned in plot device. They're your excuse to fight mechs that aren't humanoid in the game about fighting giant mechs. Well, there are some humanoid C weapons, which are beefed up on plot power, of course. These bosses are usually designed in such a way that building for them is required for the majority of players. That's fine in a vacuum, but the rest of the game is not like that. You can rock through levels with whatever, until you get one of those deep rock resupply pods literally airdropped with you with no explanation, which extremely unsubtly signals that it's time to fight a boss. You can probably beat these bosses with nothing if you want and have the attention span to bother. That's true of just about every game in the universe. Beating XCOM with only ballistics is literally an achievement. It might be technically possible to beat these bosses with whatever, but that's not really relevant because that's far too difficult for most people. The average player is going to stumble into these encounters and get their shit pushed in when they weren't having any problem before. You might claim this is a classic case of get good, and I might even be inclined to agree if the rest of the game was designed like this. If every mission needed to be scouted out and built for, which I've heard the previous games in the series are like, then it would set the precedent that bosses are too, and it would be fun in its own right. I'd also like to clarify that my issues with this game's boss design is exclusively with the C weapon bosses. All of the bosses that are just enemy ACs, I thought were perfectly balanced. This game needed to commit to either being more difficult across the board, or lowering the bosses down to the difficulty level of the rest of the game. At least narratively, this would not be hard to implement. Characters already talk to you all the time throughout the game, before, during, and after missions, and all have a staked interest in seeing you succeed. The intro to this video is exactly what they never do. Intermingle this game's plot and gameplay. It would have not been difficult to make a side character give you advice on what to expect, but they never do. It's only ominous, vague statements about what's happening which intentionally leave you in the dark. That's fine on its own, but it would not be hard or unwelcome to include a brief description in the mission briefings about potential threats, or, hear me out, list who the job is commissioned by? How the fuck is that information not shown? To flash my gamer card and show that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to this game's balance, I only struggled with 2 bosses in this game, and both were either the literal end of the game or an hour out from it. I lucked my way into building the Gruel, which curb-stomped the difficulty of this game into oblivion. It was excellent against most boss encounters, which trivialized the experience pretty significantly. Picking out your loadout to fit the situation is an aspect of gameplay that I really enjoy in something like Long War, where each soldier is a tool to be utilized in different ways. Before I finalized the Gruel, I didn't find it difficult to analyze the bosses and find a weakness and then exploit it. In fact, I thought it was pretty fun. I would have personally much preferred the entire game to be like this, or not at all. Your mech's customization is quite robust and very enjoyable. New parts get unlocked and drip-fed through the store as you progress, and after a certain point relatively early on, you effectively have access to all of the mech parts in the game at all times, because selling parts you already own are full refunds. I really like this because it means you realistically never have to grind, but their genius plan to balance this out was by having the interface be absolutely horrible. You do effectively have all parts available at all times, but actually selling, buying, and equipping them is such a large pain in the ass that you won't want to bother. That is not a good way to handle this problem. This game's first real boss, the Balteus, comes really early on and is the first brick wall that you have to smash through. I took this down in about a dozen attempts, changing my loadout each time to better fit the situation. But I know friends that struggled against it for upwards of 5 hours. Having a boss be that dramatic of a difficulty wall, I think is pretty clearly bad design, when none of the game up until that point signaled that it would ever be that hard. I don't think the 3rd hardest encounter in the entire game should have been the first real boss. But I think I understand the point of the Balteus' placement. He's supposed to be there to teach you the importance of speed and dodging by shoving you through a bullet hell. But the point is so overdone that it's like to a comedic degree. They could have cut the amount of missiles he throws at you in this encounter by 2/3, and it would have still gotten the intended lesson across. I don't think FromSoft's reputation is doing them many favors with this game. You can pretty safely expect the insufferable Dark Souls just play better crowd to lambast anyone complaining it's too difficult, because From are known for making difficult games. This video might also come across like me complaining the game is too hard, but if anything, I want it to be more difficult. I want the level of difficulty that the game throws at you to be leveled off and consistent rather than a complete mess that looks like Fury's difficulty curve. I've seen lots of comparisons to From's other darling, Elden Ring, and it's hilarious to me. These two games are literally complete opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of tone, story, level format, character power, tech level, gameplay. The only thing that stays consistent between them is the third-person camera. Comparing these two because they share the same developer is like trying to compare Ace Combat to Katamari because they're both third-person games published by Namco. Or get this, trying to compare Ace Combat to another game they published, Elden Ring. Joseph Anderson stated that all open-world games going forward get compared to Elden Ring, but I don't think he nor I expected literally completely different genres to get compared to it too. If you want to fall back on comparing a developer's work to their previous releases to see how they compare, that's fine, but then tell me how Bethesda is still in business when the company hasn't released a working game in over 10 years. If Starfield even runs past the main menu, people will laud it like it's the second coming. I think you should compare games to actually relevant other examples, instead of the company's previous work in entirely different genres. Most people who are complaining about this game didn't really know what they wanted from it, but I don't blame them. With the incredibly inconsistent difficulty, I have no idea who From's intended audience was. Most of the game is too easy for hardcore gamers like me, but the boss design is too punishing for the average Capcan Kyle. This is your spoiler warning. I will be talking about this game's plot and how I think it could have been improved until this timestamp. Skip if you don't want to hear anything, not that you're missing out.
Wait, over there.
Trespassers to Rubicon, this is your warning.
We are the Brotherhood of Steel.
AC6's story sure as hell ain't anything to write home about either. There are a handful of good character moments with literally the only person in the entire game who gets any development, and basically no payoff to the first half of the story. My main motivation with siding with my handler at the end had nothing to do with the stakes in the story. I just liked his voice. Well, that, and I thought the mystic nuclear energy demon that spontaneously generated inside my head to push me around and make decisions for me was insufferable. It's a shame that she has the most dialogue out of any character in the game, and is about as charismatic as the Force Priestesses from that one really shit Clone Wars arc. Let's talk about how Ire, the red Gatorade turned conscious, is written. Despite being a literal manifestation of energy, she is written like a human being. She is literally power come conscious. She shouldn't be talking like a person, or even have gender to begin with. Why on earth did they write them to view the rest of the Coral as their family? Surely it would be either hive mind, or there would be so unimaginably many of their family that Ire's voice in particular would fade into quintillions of others. They're even introduced to you as if they are a person. This is like if a battery managed to masquerade as your girlfriend. It should not be capable of that. The literal manifestation of power is calm and collected, and doesn't have any angry outbursts at all until you're about to murder them. Makes sense. Raw power is known for being very stable. Their main motivation is to try to keep the rest of the Coral alive, which, you know, fair enough. And, of course, they do this by blindly trusting the emotionless, faceless mute with no allegiance or stake in the universe. Because that always goes well. She doesn't even have the courtesy to act surprised if you betray her. Now, I'm not a brilliant writer or anything, but hear me out. Their current motivation as written in the game is to find a way for humanity and Coral to somehow coexist and prosper, and, in a way, forcefully evolve. What if instead they wanted to try evolving and ascending by, oh, I don't know, lighting into a blaze that shakes the stars? Or, better yet, maybe stick to the rather interesting plot that you had going on about the Illuminati trying to stop corporate greed from exploiting something insanely dangerous, instead of devolving into a showdown between the literal Mute and the Mary Sue. Look, I know I talk about this game a lot, but could you imagine if XCOM gave up on all of its themes about humanity coming together between cultural borders to save Earth, and instead made the ending Bradford fist-fighting an ethereal just for the spectacle? My ideal version of this game's plot is what I'll be discussing for a little bit, and it just doesn't have ire in it at all. Keep the Coral in as a MacGuffin that the corporations argue and fight over, and dive into the themes that they were already exploring there, about how both sides are ultimately the same, the pointlessness of the conflict, how you as a mercenary change sides like someone with a one-day bicycle, and lastly, how easy it is to romanticize and idolize someone who you barely know. That's referring to Rusty from the player's perspective, and the player themselves for all of the NPCs. An excellent addition would have been repeatedly showing an updated map of Rubicon showing the fronts progressing like what Ace Combat does in its mission briefings. Maybe actually make the Rubicon Liberation Front into a real faction that doesn't disappear after that halfway point when the game decides to drop the story that it was telling to be about Red Mountain Dew instead. You could side with Arquebus, the Red Guns, the Liberation Front, or no one. The corporation's endings would be largely the same, with them convincing Raven to help them with the promises of glory and money, wiping the other out after a dramatic confrontation with Rusty and the Liberation Front, and the corporation you chose utilizing Coral to create some Metal Gear with. The Liberation Front's ideology is pretty open-ended because almost nothing is established about them in the game, but it's pretty safe to say that they wouldn't really be a fan of companies. It's a safe bet that they'd kick both corporations off utilizing Raven and Rusty's help, and establish Rubicon as an independent, anti-capitalist state. What they do from there would largely be up to whatever From would want. Either they decide to hoard the Coral, utilize it to become a great power themselves, they destroy themselves with it, or whatever else. The last ending, if you side with no one, would just be the Fires of Raven ending that is already in the game. You agree with Walter's conclusion that the only solution to Coral's destructive power is snipping it in the bud, and you make the game's subtitle into reality. Instead of the Coral itself manifesting a consciousness to fight you, instead, every force on Rubicon who you've interacted with throughout the game tries to stop you. The final confrontation could have been hard as hell, maybe even throw in an additional ending if you fail about how Raven was the true force to reunite all the factions by giving them a sense of mutually assured destruction if they all don't cooperate. You know, like what's already in the game. Except instigated by the player instead of two, as of yet completely unmentioned factions that come out of nowhere. Regardless of the ending that you chose, a statue of Raven's armored core is built on Rubicon, either by one of the corporations, the Liberation Front, or pure chance. Smoldering ash from the inferno that you caused. Now, that was quite negative, so I do want to say that I actually really liked this game. I'd probably give it somewhere in the range of a 3 out of 5. It was fun for me for its initial run-through, but lots of stuff like the arena and the second half of the plot felt super unfinished, and I really have no interest in ever playing it again. But that's fine. I enjoyed my time with it, and I don't really regret playing it at all. The first half of the plot was really good. I liked how Raven is just some nobody who seems to be manipulated by everyone around them. I'm just disappointed because it so dramatically failed to stick the landing. I think an additional, much more difficult path to fight against everyone would have been a very interesting addition for player choice. Final words though, stop comparing this game to Elden Ring. For the love of God, thanks to Emmy for their reckless financial abandon. Both them and the rest of my patrons are all wonderful people. Love you all, click some of the videos here, and join my Discord.